Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the carburetor kit in the Homelite LX30 chainsaw. The same principle will apply if you have a Super 2 Homelite chainsaw as well. And the reason for that is that those two chainsaws are pretty well identical. There's just a few subtle changes. This one has two triggers. Some Homelite Super 2s only have one, and they look exactly like this one. This one here, the handle's a bit shorter. It's got only one throttle trigger over here. But when it comes to replacing the carb kit, it's pretty well the same procedure. And this is the saw I'll be doing it on today. The reason why I'm replacing the carburetor kit is that it's very hard to start. Even after adjusting the carburetor, you still have to pull it over and over and over. So at this point here, because the saw's been sitting for many years, it's due for a new carburetor kit. To start this job, I'm going to remove the bar and chain, and I'll be using a 7/16 socket to do this. What you need to do is get the chain off the sprocket. And I'm going to take off this torque screw over here. It's a T20. Now I'm going to use a T25 torque screwdriver to remove the 4 screws that hold the recoil on. Now I'm going to pull the recoil assembly off. I'm going to reach down over here and take this plastic cover off. Now you'll need to remove the 2 torque screws over here. Once they're off, flip it over and remove the 2 torque screws underneath. Now I'm going to remove the spark plug just to make it easier to get the whole block out. By removing the spark plug, it'll make it easier to get the block out. Now what I need to do is remove the linkage from the carburetor to the throttle trigger. And these can be very tricky on these Super 2s or LX30s. Basically, you want to remove it from the plastic trigger up top here without breaking the plastic part. So basically, I'm just going to reach in with needle nose pliers and then twist it out of there. I'm going to push down on the plastic, and there we go. You also may want to take note of how it's connected on the carburetor butterfly down here. And there it is down here. Now I'm going to try to leave it on the carb while I pull the block out. Now the whole part of the motor here is going to come out. The only thing that will be obstructing you when you pull it out is the wire that goes to the switch. So I'm going to start pulling it out. Now that the block's a bit pulled out, I'm going to push the tabs on the switch and push it up. It may be a different switch on an older saw. It may just be a toggle switch. Now I should be able to pull the block out. And now what I'm going to do is take the connectors off the switch here. And remember, this is the position the switch was in on the saw, so this may matter when you put it back on. You want to put it back on the same because you don't want the on and off positions to be reversed. Now I'm just going to run the wires through the switch hole, and the block should come right out. And the first thing I'm going to show you on here is how the throttle linkage is hooked on the carburetor. As you can see here, this is how it was in there, just like this. And now with the whole block out, you can see the carburetor. I'm going to take the air filter off first. By the way, this is the fuel tank and this is the oil tank. Now with the T25 torque screwdriver, I'm going to remove the 2 screws that hold the carburetor on. I'm going to take this off. Now I'm going to disconnect this line here that goes to the oil tank. And I'm also going to disconnect the fuel line from the carb here. So the carburetor on this saw here is a Walbro, and it's a model WTA24 carburetor. That's the number you need when you go get a new carb kit for it. So now I'm just going to start taking it apart. You might notice sometimes that the cover is stuck on. All you need for this is a flat screwdriver and just pry it off. And I can already see that the diaphragm is in bad shape. You can see the big grooves over here and it's stiff. That's just from age, from sitting. It's probably been in that carb for close to 20 years. But the inside of the carb looks nice and clean, so that's good. And again, the carb is nice and clean. And here's the diaphragm on this side. It's not that bad, but I'm still going to be replacing it. Now what I'm going to do is use a pick like this and remove the screen. Even though the screens look clean sometimes, they can be varnicized with gas. So it's going to be in the kit anyways. I'm also going to remove the needle and the lever there. I'm just going to loosen the screw here. I'm not going to take it out completely. Now when you take this out, be careful because there's a spring under the lever. You don't want to lose that. And that's nice and clean. Normally if a carburetor like this was really dirty inside, I would clean it with carb cleaner. Also you can put it in an ultrasonic cleaner. It'll do a really good job in that case. But because the carburetor is so clean today, I'm just going to go ahead and rebuild it with the new carb kit. And the kit I'll be using today is a K10 watt from Walbro. I always recommend that you use an OEM carburetor kit when doing a rebuild. Now this kit here has all the hardware included. Now you're going to notice that there's a lot of extra diaphragms and stuff in the kit, so all you want to do is match up the old diaphragms to some of the new ones in here. The reason why there'll be extra diaphragms and stuff in the kit is because this carb kit is meant to go on many different carburetors. And here's the first gasket I'll need to match up. There's one. And this diaphragm here, I'm going to match it up with the blue one. It should be the same. And that's good. And now for the metering diaphragm, that's pretty easy. There's only one metering diaphragm in the kit, and it's the same. So this gasket here will replace the old one. And now just pick out the hardware that you're going to need, and take note that there will not be a new spring inside the new kit, so you have to make sure to keep the old spring. To start with, I'm going to install the small screen that goes back in the carb right here. I'm just going to put it like this. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch drill bit. Use the back side of it and push the screen down. And you want to make sure it's pushed into the bottom like this. Now I'm going to start by putting this diaphragm on this cover, and now the blue diaphragm. And I'm going to put it back on the carb. I'm just going to slide it while I hold everything. It only goes on one way, so you cannot get it on wrong. Sometimes you have to move this in order to be able to put on the cover properly. And I'm going to put the screw back on. And you want it fairly tight, but not too tight. Now I need to install the needle valve back on. I'm not going to install the Welsh plugs. I don't need those today. Now I'm going to put the needle valve in the carb. And I'm also going to put the small spring over here. And now with the pin and the lever in one hand, I'm going to insert it in the carburetor. You want to keep your fingers on there so the spring doesn't pop out. And you also want to make sure that the spring is properly installed under the lever here, as you see here, and that it's hooked in the needle valve. Now usually I set the lever flush with the carb, but if you have this tool here, you can check it. Here it says WTA. It is a model WTA carburetor. I'm just going to insert over like this, and you want the center part to be touching the lever, or just barely, just like this. If for some reason the lever doesn't line up with the tool, just simply push it down or push it back up. Now to continue on, I'm going to install this gasket here. And always remember that the diaphragm actually goes on top of the gasket. And now I'm going to put this plate back on. It doesn't really matter where this little hole goes. And now I'm going to put all the 4 screws back on. Now I'm just going to snug the screws. The reason for that is I want to put the cover back on evenly. And I'm going to tighten up the cover just by crisscrossing. The reason for tightening up the cover evenly is to prevent air and fuel leaks. Now I've got my little pressure tester that I'm going to connect to the fuel connector on the carburetor. This one right here. I'm going to pump it up to approximately 5. And the pressure is staying on. That's good. If the pressure went down excessively, you'd want to make sure you replace the needle valve. And sometimes leaking gaskets over here can cause a carburetor to lose pressure as well. Now I've got the block ready. I cleaned it in my parts washer before putting it back together. Now that it's time to reinstall the carb on the block, you want to make sure that the intake gasket here is in good condition. I'm just going to put it back on the way it is. I'm not going to put any gasket maker or anything like that there. And you want to make sure that these holes here are not plugged. Now this little hose here from the oil tank was connected to the bottom connector over here. I'm assuming it's some kind of vent hose or something like that. And I'm going to line up the carb, put the 2 screws and the air filter cover back on. And now I'm going to tighten up the screws evenly. You want it fairly tight, but don't over tighten it. Now I'm going to connect the fuel tank hose on the carburetor connector over here. And on this one it's a black plastic connector, so be careful you don't snap it. And now you'll see that the fuel tank and the oil tank will line up like this. Now I'm going to reinsert the carburetor linkage just like this. Insert it in the carburetor, and then you just want to put it up here. I'm going to put it into the cowling. I've also cleaned this as well in a parts washer. Make sure that the spark plug boot goes all the way in as well. I'm going to insert the switch wires up here so I can connect the ignition switch. And I'll be putting it in this way, and I'm going to connect this connector here at the back and the other connector on the other one here. Now I need to push the block in a bit. Now I should be able to click the switch in there. And now to hook up the throttle linkage, make sure it's depressed here. Now what you want to do is hook this into it. So now with a good pair of needle nose pliers, just hook it in there. It's not the easiest of throttle linkages that I've worked on, I can tell you that. And there you go. So basically the hook in here has to be inside that plastic part. And just check it after to make sure everything's working. Now what I'm going to do is put the screws back on, the top ones and the bottom ones. Now I'm going to reinstall the recoil. Now I'm going to reinstall the bar and chain. I've got it all together like this. And what you want to do is just basically insert it in there. It's a bit tight. And get it right on the sprocket, just like you see inside here. And you want to make sure it's lined up like this. And now put this plate back on. And there's a large washer that goes here, and then the nut goes on. And always hold the bar up when you tighten up the nut. So now I've got it all back together. It's pretty well ready for a test run. I'm not going to put the air filter back on until it runs properly. And what I'm going to do is turn these screws right in and then turn them out approximately a turn and a half out each. And then I'm going to start it up and adjust the carburetor from there. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn them in. Now I'm going to count out a turn and a half. Half a turn, 1 turn, 1.5. And I'll do the same with the low screw right here. Now before I get started, I'm going to spray it with a bit of penetrating oil inside the carburetor. That's just to help fire it up right away so I don't have to pull it all day. So I'm going to spray it right in the carb. Now I'm going to put the choke on, hold the throttle. I shut it off. I'm going to take it outside and finish adjusting the carburetor. Now the way I'm going to adjust the carburetor is I'm going to adjust the high screw at full throttle, which is the top screw here, probably by turning it in. And I'm going to adjust the L screw here when the chainsaw is idling. You also want to make sure that the screws are turned out enough so that when you throttle up, it does take the gas. If it dies when you go to throttle up, it's probably because the screws are turned in too much. But if it runs too rich, then they're probably turned out too much as well. Also, if it's idling really slow and it's smoking a lot, it's probably set too rich as well. So what I'm going to do now is start it up, let it warm up a bit, and then go from there. seems to run good now. I put the air filter back on over here. I'm not going to put the black plastic cover yet. I'm going to try it out outside in a few logs and see how it works. So it seems to run good now. I'm pretty happy with it. It is a small saw, so you do have to take your time when you're cutting through logs like that. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.